Okay, so this is the new example. So in the vtool templates, there's a new FkCurveRig, and it gives an example of 5 different types of FkCurveRig, 5 different configurations of FkCurveRig. Um, to get the latest vtool templates, you would download it from the zip and unzip it in a place where Vetala is looking. And then you're going to need to update Vetala because there are some fixes to the ribbon and some other fixes that are needed in order for this demo to work the way it does right now. So you can go to the latest releases and you can download the zip and you should be good to go. You just replace wherever you have Vetala sourcing, you just replace it with that zip and unzip it, replace it, and you're good to go. So then in Maya, I'll go to my FkCurveRig process, and right off the bat, there's going to be a simple FkCurveRig, a default, a stretch on off, a ribbon, and a ribbon advanced. And I'll step through these and show exactly what each one is good for and what the thinking for it was. So I'll just start off by maybe building up to this point here. Process, yes. Okay, so here's the simple setup. And this is really good for wires or antennae, something that is really thin and doesn't need to twist. So if I go here and I start to rotate it, you'll see it doesn't twist. However, because it's not twisting, it's very stable. So like I can pull this all around and you get like really nice result. And it's not like twitching or anything as you pull it around. Something that this is doing that's different than the default is, okay, so let me run this again. So as that built, it didn't change the geometry at all. And if I turn off my skin cluster on the geometry, for some reason I'm in a bad selection mode. There we go. And if I turn off my skin cluster, it's shifted slightly, but it's not that bad. And then and probably part of that, no, there's no translate there. So now if I do the default one though, if I run this, you'll see that this has a significant change in its shape. And if I select it and turn off its skin cluster, it's definitely shifted a lot. So what's different between the simple and this one? It's just a configuration. So this is kind of a little bit not simple, but it's illustrating that we can, and you'd want it on this kind of setup to have this, because what it does is, let's imagine we have a bunch of wires hanging underneath a robot, and we just want to rig all those different wires, but when they rig, we don't want them to change shape, and we want the curve to match pretty closely to what the wire is. So as long as we put our joint chain within the wire nicely, and we use these settings, our wire won't shift or change shape, and we'll have a nice, like if I turn on the setup here, and I go to the IK curve, you see you have a nice detailed curve. It's got a lot of CVs. So what's happening here is we've set it to 3 controllers, but we set the span count to 20. And set control count, usually you're just setting the control count. You never actually look at these other settings. But right now I'm explaining exactly what these other settings that probably people don't use very much are used for. So span count here will be 20, and so that means that this high-res wire is going to have around 20 CVs. And then because wire high-res was set to true, it just means that this curve is going to be a wire deformer to this curve. And this curve is still being used to drive controllers. And then this curve wires it doesn't drive controllers, sorry. The controllers drive this curve. And then this curve wire deforms this curve. And then this curve moves the joint chain. So it gives you the fact that the joint chain won't change very much as it's being built. And then the other thing that it gives you is a nice curve to feed into a dynamic setup. So you can make this curve dynamic, and then you could have the joint chain react to a dynamic curve. So again, really good for wires on a robot or stuff that's hanging, ropes and stuff like that. And then I'll show maybe in another video how to make it dynamic. Okay, so then for the default setup, I tried to keep it just the default settings, but there was a couple things that I needed to change, like the set stretch axis to Y, and that's because I've oriented my joints Y down the joint chain. So I needed to set stretch to Y, and then set fix X axis to true is something that probably not many people have used either, but it can come in handy if you need to have a certain orientation, like Y going down the chain. But the spline IK doesn't really support that. The Maya spline IK has issues with Y going down the chain. Even if you configure the spline IK differently in the advanced twist options, you're still going to get issues if it's not oriented X down. You still, even like this, you're getting some issues, but this is basically a spline IK with X down. And the way that that's happening is, so even though this is Y, in my setup for that default, there is now a duplicate chain, and the duplicate chain has all of the axes pointing X down. And then this duplicate chain drives the main chain, which is over here. So this chain, which is Y down, is being driven by this chain, which is X down. And this chain is the one that's being affected by the spline IK. So again, just a convenience to be able to make sure that your chain is X down without having to change very much of your joints. This will just live in the setup, and you can keep your main joints oriented the way you want. And this creates this chain automatically, so you don't need to worry about it. There's a couple other things about this setup that I wanted to show. Oh, one of the things is I set the world up axis to 2, and what that means is if I go to my advanced twist, it's using closest Y, which helps again with the twisting to be more stable. You can see here it's definitely twisting, like it's pulling the geometry around as I rotate it on Y, whereas on this one, it does not pull the geometry around. It just deforms the curve. And here, on both of these setups, if you move the middle point and you rotate on Y, it's not going to do anything. And that's an artifact of the spline IK. And then the other thing here is if I pull this down, there's this stretch bulge attribute. And what this does is as the chain rotates downwards, it's going to bulge. And again, you're getting some weird twisting at the bottom there. That seems to go away when I turn off the... It's very tricky, like if I rotate this in a weird way, now I'm getting it. Some of that could be because of the... Okay, so on the main control at the end, there is actually this locator twist end. Maybe this needs to be like zeroed out or aligned a different way. So these can be customized as needed to get a more solid setup. These are can be looked at as starting points to build on top of. You get a spline IK, you get your controllers, everything's kind of set up, and then you can go and configure it as needed. So these can be great starting points for spline IK. And then if I do stretch on off, so this is another spline IK, except now we have something that's good for kind of VFX setups where you can turn your stretch on and off. So if you want your character to stay anatomically correct, you can make sure that the spine doesn't stretch. And so if I pull this down, you can see it's not stretching. And then if I turn stretch on, Now it's compressing, and we still have stretch bulge. And so now we can build this kind of thing. So a couple other things that are neat with this configuration is, well, it's got more control. So I've set the control count to 5. I've set the number of follows. So, and actually now that I've set it to 5, you can see it's keeping the curvature fairly nicely. So then I don't need to do the what's being done on the simple where I set the span count to 20. Now I have enough spans. It's keeping its curvature, so maybe I don't need to change those other settings. And then set create follows. So on this one, you can see that the mid control follows between the bottom and the top. So as I move the bottom sub control, it's moving that middle. As I move the top controls, it's moving that middle. And basically, now that for stretch on off, now that I set create follows off, if I move this top control, it's not moving the sub controls underneath. And then set orient controls to joints. It what it basically does is as it's building the controls, it finds the closest joint to that control and then orients the control to the joint. And so by default, the FkCurveRig just orients to world. But if you set orient controls to joints, then your control will orient to the joint. So that can be a nice setting if you need to have your controls follow an arcing curve. Okay, so that's that one. And now if I run ribbon, so you can see that, we were getting a lot of weird artifacts in these different setups. Like on this one, I pulled it around and I was getting like twisting stuff happening as like there, the twisting happens fairly quickly there. But on this one, you can see that I don't get any of those issues as long as I'm not pushing too far. And basically that's because it's a ribbon setup and you have, if I go here, you have an actual NURB surface, and whatever the NURB surface does, the joints have a locator that it follows the surface with, and whatever the NURB surface does, then your geometry or your joints are doing the same. You can see that with this, you can get a nice twisting at the midpoint, and the skinning isn't exactly 100% nice, but I can twist at the bottom. You can get a fairly a little bit cleaner setup, but if you push it too far, like if I push this twist too far, I'm going to start to get artifacts. So and well, that's the main benefit to the ribbon. One of the problems with the ribbon, if you bend it too much to the side, I mean, your NURB surface is going to start to collapse, and so you're going to start to get weirdness with your joints. But for the most part, if you're not bending it too much like that, you're getting a nice setup. So let's check the settings for ribbon. I just do rig dots. So I do FkCurveRig like I have been for the other ones, but in this case, I'm set ribbon to true. And now I had to set the ribbon offset axis. So what this does is, if I look at my joint chain, X is pointing to the side, and so is my ribbon, because I've set the ribbon offset axis to X. So whatever axis, if it's Z, the ribbon will be aligned along Z, and if it's Y, it's going to be collapsed in this case. So you have to be careful to make sure to set this axis for the ribbon, otherwise you'll get issues. And then set create follows. Oh, this is set to false, and it just means that I can pull this around without it affecting that middle control, just like on the other example over here. And so that's it for the simple ribbon, and then let's run advanced. So this is kind of experimental, but it seems to be working well. I'm using it on a couple rigs in production. So this, what's different about this one, if I go here, it has set ribbon joint aim to true, and it has set stretch on off. So the aiming, what it does is if I pull this around, usually with a ribbon, you're not getting the aim down the axis, but you can see here that as I go up the change, that aim is being maintained. Now doing that potentially removes, oh no, I was able to maintain the twisting. It is maybe a little bit less sensitive on the twisting, but it looks like it's working pretty good. So you have the twisting and you have it aiming at the next joint. So that's one of the options of the advanced, and it just means you get a much nicer deformation, more akin to what's in the spline IK. So a lot of the advanced makes it more like the spline IK. So the other way that it becomes more like the spline IK is you can now turn the stretch off on. So right now stretch is off. So if I pull it up, it's going to maintain its length. And if I pull it down, it's going to maintain its length. And the skinning isn't that great. So if I go here and I pull this up, you can see that it's keeping its length along the NURB surface. And then if I pull it down, you can see that as it pulls away from the NURB surface, it's maintaining its length. So so that's one of the nice features. That feature comes at a high cost though. If I go to the node editor, and I've found that it doesn't, as long as you don't have too many joints, it doesn't take a lot to evaluate this, but it's got a very complex node network happening here that allows for that behavior. And then, okay, so the other feature for this, I think that was about it actually. Yeah, it has the stretch off on, and then it has the aiming, and that's what makes it a more advanced setup. If I go into the setup here, it's got a bunch of rivets, and these rivets are being driven by that complex network. But yeah, so you get all the nice abilities of the twisting that a NURB surface gives you, coupled with the stretch on-off ability and the aiming. So it can do, like if it bends sharply like that, it will still do a nice aim, whereas this one doesn't have the joint aiming. If I bend it, you'll see what happens. It's not as nice of an arc happening as this one because of the aims. You're getting this kind of shelf here. On this one, sorry, on this mesh, you're getting this shelf. And on this one, you're kind of getting wrinkles because of the aiming. So that shows a bunch of different spline IK FkCurveRigs and ribbon FkCurveRigs. This is all live and available on GitHub. Let me know if there's any issues or you have any bugs that need to be fixed. And thanks for watching.